Welcome to the third chapter on the London system. In the previous chapter, we had covered White's main lines after d4, d5, bishop f4, knight f6, e3, e6, knight f3, c5, and we basically started with knight d2 here. And after knight c6, we covered c3 as well as all the alternatives. However, there are players who start with 5 c3 and basically after knight c6 want to retain some extra options apart from playing knight bd2. This is what we are going to check in this chapter and is going to be the focus of study. There are not many options and White's best bet is just to transpose, but it makes sense to check some ideas. The main sideline is obviously bishop d3, where White wants to replicate the knight bd2 setup, but we are not going to get cd, ed, knight h5 here, as the bishop is not forced to go back to e3 and might go to other squares. White hasn't committed knight d2 and we'll have a different set of structure. But let's start by checking bishop b5, which was played by Grandmaster Nisipiano, who's a great, how do I put it in a well way? Let's say a good practical theoretician. What do I mean by that? He finds ideas which are not great objectively, but makes some dynamic, brings out some dynamics in the position, and it's very interesting to play in a practical game. However, this is not one of them, as the bishop is very vulnerable here, and we can play queen b6, attacking this bishop and the pawn on b2. Curious viewers might think that why do we play queen b6, where in this position we didn't want to play queen b6 due to c4. If you ask that, kudos, you are thinking is in the right direction and you are asking yourselves the right kind of questions. However, the issue for White is that White has not developed a piece, but rather played c3, and now if White plays c4 and spends time, it would be very slow for White. White probably needs to play queen e2, where you defend the bishop on b5. If you play bishop into c6, black can play b into c6, and we are threatening queen b2 as well as bishop a6, after which White can't castle comfortably. Black is better due to the pair of bishops, and we are going to repair our pawn structure with c into d4 and c5, where we'll also be better due to the more active positioning of our pieces once we get bishop a6 in. And therefore, I think the only try here is queen e2. But here, even after bishop d7, we are very comfortable and in fact on this better end of the equality. White's pieces are misplaced. The queen doesn't belong on e2 and is doing a passive job while we are making threats. Our queen is very active. We are going to play a6 on the next move to create some threats on the b2 pawn and simply play bishop e7 and short castle. And I don't think this position deserves more explanation than that. White has troubles developing with knight bd2 due to the hanging pawn on b2. There is bishop e2 as well, which is quite passive. But just like the main line with bishop d3, we play knight h5 and try to win the bishop pair. If White plays bg3, we have seen this idea of taking on g3 and after hg3 playing g6 so that there is never pressure on the h7 pawn. And then we might play cd for bg7 or bd6, queen e7 and try to push e5 at the right time. We have pair of bishops, we have a better pawn structure and White has no attacking chances. So black seems to be just better both strategically and objectively. Bishop e5 as usual is not a problem and the inclusion of f7, f6 is good for us. After bishop g3, we play knight into g3, h into g3. And although we can play g6 here, it's completely fine. I just like the idea of playing bd7 followed by playing queen d6 and castling long. Why are we doing that? Because we don't want to get into some threats on the king side. And once we castle long, we will look to open up the position with e5. Black is better due to the pair of bishops and more space along with the better pawn structure. And if white plays bishop g5 here, the point is white is setting up a trap after f6, since white has bishop h4, and now knight e5 is a real possibility. However, we can play queen b6 first, where we are putting pressure on the b2 pawn, and now instead of playing f6, we will play h6 and g5 and win the bishop pair. So let's say white plays queen c2. White is defending the pawn on b2. We play h6. After bishop h4, we play g5. And after bishop g3, we take, and play either bishop g7 or the very strong g4, gaining more space and meeting knight fd2 with f5, restricting white's e4 breaks. We are now better due to the extra space and the pair of bishops along with the better pawn structure. And that brings us an end to this sideline with bishop e2. We now go back to the sixth move sidelines and check knight e5, where white wants to play bishop b5, but it's premature and we play queen b6, attack the weakness on b2, and stop white from playing bishop b5. White needs to play queen b3 here, since queen c2 runs into knight h5, where we win the bishop pair and subsequently have a more comfortable position. If white plays b3, white has created some dark square weaknesses for us to exploit. We want to play cd4 at the right time and try to get bishop b4 in if white plays e into d4. If white plays c into d4, this gives us good weaknesses to attack. If we want to play cd4, and if white plays c into d4, we want to play bishop b4 and give a check. If white plays e into d4, we have a permanent weakness to attack to. But before that, we try to trade off this active knight for our inactive knight. And basically, we claim that if white takes on d7, we get a piece developed for free. And we might actually play g6, bg7, e5, since white doesn't control the e5 square with two pieces anymore. If we get e5 in, white will be forced to take, where once we take back and make sure that the pawn on d5 is supported, we'll have two pawns in the center, thus keeping an extra space advantage. And if white plays knight d7, knight c6, we'll just play bc6, followed by c into d4 and c5, repairing the pawn structure and making these pawns weak. We now have a hook to attack to on the queen side and might play a5, a4, trying to undermine white's queen side pawn structure at some point in time. And that brings us to queen b3, where white stops us from taking on b2. And as usual, we play knight h5 and win the bishop pair. We don't want to play queen b3 right here, because after a b3, white's rook is more active, and the spoiling of the pawn structure is worth it for white, since the rook now joins the game. But after knight h5, we win the bishop pair and retain a very comfortable position. And that brings us an end to this sideline with knight e5. Let's move on to h3, which has been tried by some players to meet knight h5 with bishop h2. But now we can play bishop d6, which is a very natural move in these positions. If white had played knight d2 here, after bishop d6, white has ideas of bishop g3, which is in fact the main line in this position. But since white has played h3, we can now play bishop d6, as bishop g3 is no longer a choice. White needs to take on d6, which we meet by queen into d6 and prepare short castle with e5, where this bishop will join the game, and we are strategically better due to more space. And that is it for white's sixth move sidelines, apart from the main line with bishop d3. Bishop d3 is also met with a similar response, just like knight bd2. We play knight h5 and we want to win the bishop pair. We don't play cd4 here simply because it's not required. It's possible, but knight h5 is much stronger here. Viewers may question that why don't we play knight bd2, knight h5? Because white now can play bishop g5. And after f6, bishop h4, if we play cd4, trying to transpose to the main lines, white has the extra option of playing cd4, and well, this structure is somewhat different from what we were used to playing. This line is perfectly possible, But I just feel that the line with CD4, ED4, knight h5 is more dynamic and better suited for players trying to play for a win from black. After bishop d3, we play knight h5, trying to win the bishop, and white has those similar choices to move the bishop away. If white plays bishop g5, we don't play f6 now because white hasn't committed knight d2 and rather played bishop d3. So there are more threats on this diagonal, but rather just go queen b6, attack the pawn on b2. If white plays queen c2, we revert back to the secondary idea of playing h6 and g5. This is possible now since the queen doesn't eye the h5 knight, and then we'll win the bishop pair and play bg7 e5, gaining more space in the position. Or we could play g4 and f5, just like the idea we had observed earlier. G4 and f5, I'm sorry. If white plays b3 here, we still play h6 with the idea of g5, and bishop h4 runs into g5. Bishop h4 runs into g5, perfectly fine, but I think we can also play cd4. The point is ed4 runs into g5, g4, where we'll play knight into g3 and push e5. While white can play knight d4, but this pawn on c3 is now very weak. We can comfortably take. If white plays cd4, we get bishop with a check and white will be in some pressure here. And if ed4, we have a weakness to attack to, and we can just play knight f4, try to win the bishop pair, and then play around this weakness, followed with the plan of bishop d6, bishop d7, and rook c8, followed by castling at some point. Black just has a very comfortable position here. Let's go back to this position where white might try bishop g3. And now knight g3 is not that great. It's possible, but after hg3, we might just have to transpose to the main line with queen b6. I want to start with queen b6 because this gives whites an option to go further wrong with queen b3, where we reveal the idea of playing c4. We force white to take on b6, and although it seems like we have spoiled our pawn structure, this is actually beneficial for us as we can start targeting white's weak pawn on c3 and basically create more weaknesses on the queen side. We are anyway going to eliminate our pawn with b5, b4, so there won't be the problem of double pawns anymore. And at any point, we can play knight g3 and win the bishop pair. Black is better due to the potential of winning the bishop pair, having more space in the position, and also the potential to create and attack more weaknesses. And instead of bishop g3, if white castles, we can just take, and after ef4, play queen b6, attack white's weaknesses on b2 and d4. Black is better due to the pair of bishops and better pawn structure along with more space. That brings us to the last sideline with bishop e5. As usual, white is tempting us to take on e5, which we don't do, and play the very natural f6, forcing the bishop to go back, and playing queen b6, not knight g3 since the bishop is on d3. We play queen b6, get the queen away from h5, and now we play g6 with the threat of playing knight g3, bishop g7, and e5. We'll then have the as usual more space, better pawn structure, and the pair of bishops. Yeah, that brings us an end to this chapter. I won't be summarizing this chapter because it is very short and the ideas are very easy to remember. Just remember that you basically have the same ideas in just like the CD, ED, knight h5 line with knight bd2 included. All you need to remember is that instead of playing knight g3 very quickly, we play queen b6 first to provoke the queen to c2 so that it is not eyeing h5, and then go for the knight g3 ideas. That's it, and I'll see you in the next sidelines chapter on the London system.